No one inside Ducati expected the fear to return this fast. Not after 5 seasons of domination. Not after building the most complete MotoGP weapon the sport had ever seen. But during a quiet afternoon test in Valencia, something happened. A rookie riding a brand new Yamaha V4 prototype braked so late, so violently, and yet so precisely that engineers from multiple factories stopped what they were doing just to watch. They didn't know it yet, but that moment would ignite a new war, and the name behind it would soon shake the entire championship. Toprak Razgatlioglu, a rider Ducati believed would need years to adapt, had just rewritten every assumption. And what unfolded next would threaten the balance of MotoGP more than any regulation change, any aero innovation, any political power shift in the paddock. Behind the closed doors of Ducati's headquarters, tension began to rise, slowly at first, then unmistakably. For years, they relied on a trusted partner, Pramac Racing, their most loyal satellite, the team that provided data, developed young talent, and acted as a second factory outfit in everything but name. But then, out of nowhere, the unthinkable happened. Pramac signed a long-term deal with Yamaha. It wasn't just a transfer, it was the removal of one of Ducati's structural pillars. And inside Ducati, even before Toprak touched a Yamaha MotoGP bike, managers began asking uncomfortable questions. Why Pramac? Why now? And what did Yamaha know that no one else did?
Because Pramac hadn't simply switched teams. They had joined a resurrection project, one Yamaha had kept in silence for far too long. And that project included the most radical engine redesign in Yamaha's modern history, a full transition to a V4 layout. Inside Ducati's engineering division, the alarm didn't ring yet, but the vibrations were beginning, and what came next would shake that building far harder. The signing of Toprak Razgatlioglu was announced with quiet confidence. No fireworks, no dramatic press conference, just a simple statement. A 2-year deal, factory-spec Yamaha V4, and Toprak joining Prima Pramac Yamaha for 2026. But inside the sport, the effect was immediate. To casual fans, he was just a World SBK champion. But to engineers, crew chiefs, and data analysts, he was something else entirely. A rider with braking instincts that couldn't be caught, a sense of balance that ignored physics, a stubborn, relentless refusal to ride like anyone else. Toprak didn't bend to the motorcycle, he forced the motorcycle to bend to him. And for a prototype MotoGP machine, a bike built on the edge of chaos, that was both a blessing and the most dangerous variable imaginable. In the days after his signing, rumors circulated quietly. Pramac didn't just sign a star, they signed a force of nature. Still, the traditionalist voices believed the same thing. He will need a full season to learn, maybe 2. They were wrong. Because just weeks later, during a seemingly harmless test, Toprak would reveal the first glimpse of his real potential, and Ducati's confidence would begin to crack. For more than 2 decades, Yamaha's identity revolved around the inline 4. Smooth, predictable, precise. But MotoGP had evolved, and Yamaha had fallen behind. The solution was a decision many thought they would never make, abandoning the old identity and embracing the ruthless power delivery of a V4 engine. Internally, Yamaha called it a rebirth. Externally, rivals called it desperation. But once the new prototype started producing early data, the conversation changed. The numbers showed potential. Braking stability had improved. Rear grip behavior, Yamaha's historical weakness, looked promising. And the top speed deficit began to shrink. It wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to something dangerous. Yet none of that mattered until a rider arrived who could unlock it. And when Yamaha paired their new V4 with Toprak, the paddock unknowingly stepped into a new era. But the first real shock didn't come from the bike. It came from how fast Toprak understood it. Valencia, post-season test. A day that should have been routine. Slow laps, basic checks, riders easing into new machinery. Except one rider didn't ease in. Toprak Razgatlioglu mounted the Yamaha V4 for the first time on a fully dry track. Within a handful of laps, something extraordinary happened. He was nowhere near the limit.
He wasn't even pushing, but he was fast, extremely fast. Fast enough that mechanics from rival teams leaned against the pit wall, trying to understand what they were seeing. He braked later than anyone, harder than anyone, and somehow the front end, Michelin's infamous puzzle piece, behaved as if it had known him for years. By the end of the session, Toprak was roughly 1 second off the top time. For most rookies, 1 second is a mountain. For Toprak, especially on day one, it was a message. Even Fabio Quartararo, a former world champion and the rider who knew Yamaha best, stepped out of his garage and watched. After the session, Fabio spoke quietly, almost as if he didn't want the words to escape. "I didn't expect him to be that fast." He said it with honesty, not diplomacy. The paddock heard it, Ducati heard it, and suddenly the test wasn't about new parts or data collection anymore. It was about Toprak. But the true panic inside Ducati began not because of lap times, but because of what Toprak did next. Inside the Pramac garage, the atmosphere felt different, alive in a way no one had felt in years. The team that once lived in Ducati's shadow now stood at the center of Yamaha's future. They weren't a satellite anymore. They were the engine room of a rebirth. Engineers described Toprak's feedback as surgical. Mechanics said his ability to read engine brake behavior was uncommon.
Manager Gino Borsoi reportedly admitted that Toprak's technical understanding was far deeper than expected. Jack Miller, his new teammate, had been in MotoGP long enough to know real speed when he saw it. And after following Toprak on track for a handful of laps, Miller returned to the garage and muttered something under his breath to his crew chief. Something simple but telling, "He's quicker than I thought." Those words spread, not as panic but as recognition. Pramac had not just signed a rider, they had acquired a centerpiece. One mechanic summed it up best: "This doesn't feel like a new project, it feels like the beginning of something big." But while Pramac celebrated, Ducati began connecting dots they didn't want to see. At first, Ducati left off the rumors. A rookie? On a brand new engine? On a Yamaha? Impossible. But engineers aren't influenced by pride, they're influenced by data. And when the early telemetry reports, the ones floating quietly from garage to garage, began showing Yamaha's improvements in braking stability, corner entry, and acceleration, the tone changed. A meeting was scheduled, then another, then another. What started as curiosity turned into concern. Because Ducati had prepared for a fight against KTM. They had prepared for Aprilia's rise. They had even prepared for Honda's reinvention, but they had not prepared for this. A resurgent Yamaha, backed by Pramac, powered by a V4, led by a rider who bent the laws of riding. Inside one meeting, according to whispers in the paddock, an executive asked a quiet question. What happens when he reaches his real limit? No one answered, because no one knew. But Ducati's worries were about to get worse, because the threat was not just technical, it was psychological. Fabio Quartararo had been Yamaha's undisputed leader for years. The development direction was his. The electronics tuning was built around him. The chassis decisions followed his preferences. But in one afternoon, the dynamic shifted. Toprak wasn't only fast, he was fast in ways Yamaha had never experienced. Two different philosophies were about to collide: Quartararo's smooth, flowing, corner speed precision, and Toprak's explosive, aggressive, brake-heavy instincts. For Yamaha's engineers, it was the beginning of a nightmare, or an opportunity. To build a championship bike, they needed to satisfy both. Two riders with opposite styles, two egos with world-class ambitions, and in the background stood something more delicate: Fabio's contract. He had said publicly that Yamaha's competitiveness would determine his long-term future. Now, with Toprak rising fast, the question inside Yamaha wasn't just about development, it was about identity. Who would lead the project?
Who would define the bike? Who would Yamaha follow once the internal battle began? But the biggest twist wasn't inside Yamaha.
It was the realization that MotoGP itself was shifting toward a new era, and Toprak stood at the center. By the end of winter testing, one truth echoed through the paddock. Toprak Razgatlioglu wasn't adapting to MotoGP. He was bending MotoGP toward him. The Yamaha V4 was still young, still imperfect, still searching for its full identity. But even in its early stages, paired with a rider like Toprak, it was showing something the sport hadn't expected. A glimpse of a future where Yamaha becomes a title threat again, not in years, but immediately. And that terrified Ducati. Because domination in MotoGP is always temporary. Rossi changed the world in 2004, Marquez reshaped it in 2013. And now, in 2026, there was a feeling, a suspicion, a whisper turning into a warning that Toprak Razgatlioglu, with his impossible braking, his instinctive reading of the bike, and his refusal to ride like anyone else, might be the next catalyst. The kind that doesn't just win races, but alters eras. When he braked into the final corner of Valencia that afternoon, the paddock held its breath. Not because of the speed, not because of the sound, but because in that single moment, everyone could sense it. A new war was coming. And its opening shot had already been fired by a rider named Toprak Razgatlioglu.